9 months passed like a whirlwind, and in that time Taehyung's life transformed completely. His fashion brand, once just an ambitious dream, had become a phenomenon. Every collection he dropped went out of stock within hours, the website crashing under the weight of the demand. Celebrities, influencers, and magazines worldwide called him a visionary, praising the way he revived vintage elegance with a modern edge. People lined up around blocks for pop-up stores in Seoul, Tokyo, and Paris, desperate to get their hands on even a single piece. Awards began pouring in: Designer of the Year, Creative Mind of Asia, and even international titles that put his name alongside legends in the industry. The success allowed him to open a larger headquarters, a place buzzing with creativity. Himmin, always at his side, wasn't just his partner in designs anymore but his closest confidant, officially recognized as co-director of the brand. Jungkook had stepped in to handle visuals and campaigns, pouring his artistic soul into every shot, while J-Hope brought his creative direction and unmatched energy, making the atmosphere lively even during the most stressful nights. Together, the four of them became a dream team, bound by trust and laughter as much as by work. What started as a business quickly became a family. At home, Taehyung's world was even softer. He and Wyan had moved into their own place, a modern, warm house filled with his designs, cozy corners, and little touches that reflected their bond. Wyan's pregnancy added a glow to their lives, one that made Taehyung's heart ache with love. No matter how packed his schedule was, he never missed a doctor's visit, never missed a moment when she needed him. Late at night, he would press his lips to her belly, whispering to their child about the world waiting outside, his voice always tender, always full of promises. Their romance hadn't dimmed either. If anything, it had deepened, becoming a mixture of playful teasing and fiery devotion that kept their hearts burning. The world outside sang praises of KIMTAEHYUNG, the designer who changed the game, but behind closed doors he remained grounded. His story was already being spoken of as an inspiration from the overlooked son to the man whose name ruled headlines. Mr. Kim still refused to let go of his ego, unwilling to accept what he had lost, but Mrs. Kim often stayed quiet, her eyes softening whenever his name came up. Regret followed her like a shadow, but Taehyung no longer carried bitterness. His arrogance had mellowed into quiet confidence. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. His work, his love, and his family spoke louder than anything else ever could. And beneath it all, what kept him moving forward wasn't just the success, the awards, or the recognition. It was the thought of the baby coming soon. That tiny heartbeat had become the rhythm of his life, the promise of a new chapter that made every sleepless night and every exhausting day worth it. The Kim mansion no longer carried the same liveliness it once did. The wealth and grandeur surrounded its walls. Silence had settled like dust in the corners. Mrs. Kim often found herself lost in thought, secretly feeling pride bloom in her chest whenever she heard whispers of Taehyung's success. Every article, every award, every glowing review filled her heart with happiness for her son, the son she had once neglected, the son she now silently admired. But she kept her joy quiet, knowing that in this house, speaking of Taehyung only opened wounds. Mr. Kim, however, could not hide his bitterness. Sitting in his grand study, drink in hand, he would scoff every time Taehyung's name appeared on television. If only he had joined the family business, Mr. Kim muttered coldly, his voice heavy with arrogance. We would have been ruling the entire business world by now. But no, he wasted his talent chasing those foolish dreams. His words carried more resentment than disappointment, as though Taehyung's independence was a personal insult. Across the mansion, V sat quietly, listening. Once the golden child, now shadowed by failure, he bore the weight of his regrets like shackles. His businesses were crumbling, losses piling up one after another. The arrogance he once carried had thinned into self-loathing. Was I ever a good brother? He asked himself, remembering the years he stood by Taehyung in childhood, sometimes protecting, sometimes turning away in jealousy. Now, watching his twin rise higher while he fell lower, guilt gnawed at him endlessly. He said nothing when his father scolded him, choosing silence over defense. Every sharp word felt like karma punishment for the way he had once treated Taehyung. Mrs. Kim's heart broke a little each time she saw her younger son sit hunched, eyes down, accepting his father's cruelty. Yet she had no strength to fight Mr. Kim's pride anymore. He was too full of himself, too blind to the truth. She would only sit quietly in her room, praying her family would find peace one day. Meanwhile, Jia and Mia, desperate to restore their social image, tried several times to approach YN and Taehyung. They brought gifts, made polite calls, even sent messages hinting at dinners and reconciliation. But YN and Taehyung hardly paid them attention. Their world was too full of love, of work, of the baby they were preparing to welcome. They had no need to entertain false kindness. To them, Jia and Mia's attempts were nothing more than shallow moves meant to flaunt connections in front of their friends. Far away from the toxicity of the Kim mansion, YN and Taehyung thrived. Mr. and Mrs. Lee cherished them equally, treating Taehyung like their own son and showering YN with the same affection. They provided endless support advice, guidance, and encouragement that filled the void left by Taehyung's own parents. Whenever he needed wisdom, Taehyung found himself turning to Mr. Lee, listening carefully to every piece of guidance, never once considering asking his own father for help. To him, Mr. Kim's voice was no longer one that mattered. And so, two worlds ran parallel, one brimming with love, growth, and success, the other suffocating under pride, regret, and silence. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic, but for Taehyung, it felt like the most sacred place in the world. His hands trembled as he held YN's exhausted one, his eyes swollen and red from crying. She lay against the pillows, her face pale and damp with sweat, yet her smile was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Taehyung bent down, pressing his forehead against hers, his voice breaking. "I thought I lost you." His words cracked under the weight of fear he had carried through the long hours. His tears slipped down freely, wetting her temple. In, weak but glowing, lifted her hand to brush his cheek. "You didn't. I'm right here," she whispered, her lips curving into a tired smile. Taehyung shook his head, still choked up. "Never again. We don't need more children. YN. One is enough. Just you and me and our little one. I don't need anything else." His voice was so sincere, so desperate, that YN let out a soft laugh, her heart fluttering at his silliness even in this heavy moment. "You're ridiculous," she murmured lovingly before pulling him closer for a kiss on the corner of his lips. His tears mixed with her warmth, and for the first time in hours, he smiled through the blur. In the crib beside them, their tiny baby boy slept soundly, his chest rising and falling gently under the soft white blanket. The nurse had placed a little tag at the edge, KIMTAEHYUNG, their little bean. His arrival had stitched their world together in a way words could never describe. The quiet hospital room suddenly burst into chaos when Hyman barged in first, holding the biggest bouquet anyone had ever seen. He practically shouted, "Move aside, people. Park Hyman, the official godfather of Taiwan, has arrived." Taehyung groaned, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, who said you're the godfather?" "Me," Hyman said proudly, puffing his chest out. "I was here first. Also, look at this bouquet." "Does Jungkook bring flowers?" "No, he brings protein shakes. HEY?" Jungkook walked in right on cue, arms full with a box of cupcakes and energy drinks. "At least mine's edible." He shot him in a look, then leaned over the crib with a wide grin. "He's so tiny." "But don't worry, little Taewon. Uncle Jungkook will make sure you grow strong like me." Taehyung groaned again, half laughing. "God save my son from you three. Yeah, don't forget me." J-Hope came in next, dragging balloons bigger than the doorway. "Look at this." "I brought the vibe, the celebration, the hope." He did a dramatic twirl that made YN burst into laughter despite her exhaustion. Myra peeked behind him, her camera already out. "I'm recording all of this." Taewon needs proof one day that his dad's friends were absolute clowns. Clowns? Himmin gasped dramatically, "Excuse me, we are his role models." He leaned closer to Taehyung and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, except his dad, who cried more than a baby today. Yeah, Taehyung's face turned red as everyone erupted into laughter. Even YN joined, shaking her head. "Don't bully him, Himmin." Len came in last, holding a soft baby blanket she had picked specially. "Here," she said softly, draping it over Taewon in the crib. "Something cozy for the little bean." Himmin instantly squinted at her. "See, that's how you become the favorite aunt." "Not with protein shakes, Jungkook. Shut up." Jungkook threw a cupcake wrapper at him, and soon the room was filled with playful bickering and laughter. Amidst all the noise, Taehyung just sat there holding YN's hand, smiling. For the first time, surrounded by this family of chaos and love, he felt like his son was already home. When the room had settled from all the chaotic teasing between Himmin, Jungkook, and J-Hope, the door opened again. This time it wasn't more friends barging in with jokes, it was Mr. and Mrs. Lee, both carrying flowers and gift bags, their faces glowing with joy. Mrs. Lee rushed forward the moment she spotted YN on the bed. She held her hand gently, eyes filled with affection. "My sweet girl. You've given us such happiness today," she whispered, kissing her forehead softly. Then her gaze landed on the crib. "Oh, look at him." Taewon, her voice broke as she bent down to admire the tiny sleeping baby. Mr. Lee walked closer, calmer but no less emotional. He placed a reassuring hand on Taehyung's shoulder. "You've outdone yourself, son," he said firmly. "Not just in business, not just in success, but in building a family like this. I'm proud of you." Taehyung's throat tightened as he looked at the man who had guided him more than his own father ever had. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did," he murmured, voice heavy with emotion. Mrs. Lee chuckled through her tears. "And just look at him, already sleeping so peacefully like he knows he's loved." She glanced between Taehyung and YN. "This little one is going to grow up in a house full of laughter. I can feel it." The room warmed with soft smiles as the Lees settled in beside them, celebrating not just the birth of Taewon, but the love and resilience that had brought everyone together. The hallway outside the hospital room was quiet, only the faint beeping of machines and muffled laughter from inside breaking the silence. Taehyung stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was trembling with emotion he couldn't hide. "Yama," he whispered. Mrs. Kim's breath hitched on the other end. "Taehyung, now, is everything okay? Why are you calling so late?" Taehyung swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. I became a father today." His lips curved into the softest, proudest smile. "It's a boy, Yama. He's perfect. His name is Taewon." There was silence for a second, then the sound of stifled sobs. "My son, my baby became a father. Oh, Taehyung." Mrs. Kim cried openly, her voice breaking. "Congratulations, my love. You must be so happy. Do you need anything?" "Should I come right away?" Taehyung's smile faltered. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his heart. "No, Yama, YN is sleeping. She's exhausted. Come tomorrow, please." "Today's not the right time." Mrs. Kim's tears only grew heavier. She nodded even though he couldn't see it. "All right. I'll come tomorrow." But as she hung up the phone, the tears streamed endlessly. She sat on the living room couch, covering her face with trembling hands. "I should have been there," she whispered to herself. "My son became a father. And I will go see my grandson like a stranger, like a guest." Just then, Gia and Mia walked out from their rooms. They froze at the sight of their mother crying. "Amma, what happened? Why are you crying?" Gia asked, kneeling beside her. Before Mrs. Kim could respond, the front door opened and Mr. Kim and V stepped in, returning from an evening out. Both men froze at the sight of her tears. "What's going on? Why are you crying?" Mr. Kim's deep voice was stern but laced with concern. V's brows furrowed as he crouched down beside her. "Yama, did something happen?" "Please tell us." Mrs. Kim lifted her tear-stained face, her lips trembling as she spoke. Taehyung became a father today." For a moment, silence fell like a heavy blanket. Then V's eyes widened, his lips curling into the tiniest smile. "Hyung became a dad." He almost whispered it in disbelief, but his voice carried warmth. "Whoa." Even Mr. Kim's expression softened in shock. "A grandson," he muttered, but then his face hardened again. "Let's go to the hospital right now." Mrs. Kim let out a bitter laugh through her tears. With what face, she snapped. "After everything we did to him, after all those years of making him feel worthless, we don't even deserve to celebrate this moment. He had to call me, his own mother, and tell me I could only come tomorrow. Do you realize what that means?" Her words hung in the air like daggers. Gia, Mia, and Vi all looked down in shame, their hearts heavy. Even Mr. Kim, though his pride refused to crumble, had no answer. It should have been the happiest night of their lives as a family. Instead, they stood there in silence, realizing that the birth of Taehyung's son was a moment they couldn't even celebrate without guilt. The next morning, the hospital room was bright with sunlight streaming in through the curtains. In sat up in bed, cradling baby Taewon in her arms, while Taehyung hovered close, unable to take his eyes off the tiny bundle. A knock on the door startled them, and when it opened, the Kims entered. Mrs. Kim carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers, Gia and Mia each holding gift bags, and Mr. Kim walking in quietly behind them with V at his side. Taehyung froze for a second, his jaw tightening, but before the silence could stretch, V stepped forward with a small smile. "Congratulations, Hyung," he said, his voice low but warm. He looked at the baby in YN's arms, his eyes softening. "For the award, and now for becoming a father. You've done well." Taehyung's throat tightened. Slowly, he opened his arms, and V stepped into them, the brothers holding each other in an embrace that was heavy with unspoken words. In's eyes watered at the sight. Mrs. Kim was next, her tears already falling. She approached YN, setting the flowers on the side table before gently wrapping her arms around her. "Congratulations, my daughter." "You did so well," she whispered, then hugged Taehyung, clinging to him as though she might never let go. Meanwhile, Gia and Mia squealed softly, bouncing on their feet. Can we hold him?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Taehyung hesitated for a moment, but when YN nodded reassuringly at him, he sighed and smiled. "Okay, but carefully." The sisters gasped happily as YN carefully placed Taewon into Gia's arms first. Their faces lit up as they looked at the tiny boy, their voices softening as if they were speaking to porcelain. "He's so perfect." At the back, Mr. Kim stood silently, his eyes fixed on his grandson. His normally cold, unreadable gaze faltered when Taewon squirmed, letting out a tiny yawn. Slowly, as though fighting himself, Mr. Kim stepped forward and leaned down, his large hands trembling slightly as he took the baby into his arms. He stared at the tiny face, his expression stiff, but then, for just a fleeting second, a small smile tugged at his lips. His heart swelled, eyes stinging with an emotion he refused to show. "Hello, grandson," he whispered, his voice breaking softer than anyone had ever heard. Taehyung watched the scene, overwhelmed. He turned to YN, who reached for his hand under the blanket, squeezing it. Her eyes told him it was okay, that it was safe to let this moment exist. He gave her a small nod, holding her hand tighter. The Kims placed the gifts they brought, flowers, fruits, and neatly wrapped baby essentials by the bedside. For a brief while, the room was filled with smiles, laughter, and the cries of a newborn. Later, when the doctor came in to check YN and announced she could go home, Mr. Kim immediately spoke up. "Then you should all come with us to the mansion. It will be better for the baby and YN to recover there. We have everything prepared." Taehyung's smile faded, his voice firm. No, Appa, we're good on our own. We have everything ready, the nursery, the supplies. YN will be comfortable at home. Mrs. Kim, still holding onto YN's hand, tried gently. It would be nice. I could help take care of her, especially since you'll be busy with work. But Taehyung shook his head, his voice steady. I've already taken leave. Hyun and Hobie Hyung are handling everything. My family comes first. Work can wait. In's eyes glistened with pride as she leaned into him. The room went silent for a moment. The Kims taken aback at the firm boundary Taehyung had drawn. Mrs. Kim simply nodded, her lips pressed together, trying not to cry again because even though it hurt, she was proud of her son's choice. After the discharge, Taehyung carried Taewon gently in his arms, refusing to let anyone else hold him as they left the hospital. YN walked beside him, still a little tired but glowing with happiness, her hand clutching his sleeve. The ride home was quiet, filled only with the soft breaths of the baby and Taehyung's constant glances at him through the blanket. But as soon as they reached their house, YN gasped. The front porch was glowing with fairy lights, balloons tied to the railings, and a huge banner that read, "Welcome home, baby Taewon." The door opened suddenly and their friends poured out, shouting in unison, surprise. Hyun ran forward first, bouncing like a ball. "Yeah, my nephew is Hooray," he exclaimed, reaching to peek at the baby. Jungkook followed right after, holding a box of cupcakes with little T initials on them. Hobie came with his camera, already snapping pictures like a proud uncle. In's eyes filled with tears as she saw the effort they had decorated the entire living room with streamers, pastel balloons, and baby-themed decorations. A little cradle was set up in the center with soft toys around it, and a cake sat on the table with Taewon written in blue frosting. "Did you guys do all this?" Taehyung asked, his voice shaking as he looked around. "Of course we did," Myra laughed. "You think we'd let our little bean come home without a party?" Lin clapped his hands, grinning. "This is the new prince of the squad. We had to celebrate properly." Hyun leaned over the cradle, whispering dramatically, "Taewon, don't worry. Uncle Hyun will teach you all the cool dance moves when you grow up." "Yeah, stop corrupting the baby already," Taehyung grumbled, but his smile was too wide to hide. In sat on the couch, Taewon cradled safely in her arms while Mrs. Lee helped her settle comfortably. "This feels like a dream," YN whispered, her eyes moving from the decorations to her friends' bright faces. Taehyung sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "No," he said softly, pressing his lips to her temple. "This is our reality now." Everyone gathered around, laughter and chatter filling the house. They cut the cake, shared food, and even took turns holding the baby carefully, under Taehyung's hawk-eyed supervision. Baby Taewon's soft cries and yawns became the sweetest background music to the celebration. When the laughter and noise finally faded, and their friends left with smiles and hugs, the house fell into a hushed calm. The balloons still swayed gently in the living room, the faint smell of cake lingering in the air. Taehyung carried Taewon into the nursery for the first time, his steps slow, almost hesitant, as though he was afraid the moment would vanish if he moved too quickly. The room glowed softly under the warm light, a cozy little space painted in pastel tones, with shelves stacked with toys, a rocking chair by the window, and the tiny crib Taehyung had designed himself. He placed Taewon gently inside, pulling the blanket up to his chest. The baby shifted, let out a small sigh, and then went back to sleep, his tiny fists resting on either side of his face. YN stood at the doorway, her hand over her heart. Watching Taehyung crouch by the crib, brushing his son's hair back with trembling fingers, made her eyes well up again. She walked inside, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He looks so peaceful," YN whispered. Taehyung looked up at her, his eyes glossy. "I can't believe he's ours, our little boy," YN. I swear I'll never let him feel the pain I did growing up. He'll only know love. YN knelt beside him, cupping his face. And he already does, because he has you. For a moment, silence lingered, filled only by the soft sound of Taewon's breathing. Then Taehyung pulled into his arms, hugging her tightly, his lips pressed against her hair. You gave me everything, a home, love, and now a family. I don't need anything else. YN smiled against his chest. Don't get all emotional, Mr. Kim. You're supposed to be strong for both of us. He chuckled softly, pulling back just enough to kiss her forehead. I'll be strong. But with you beside me, I don't even need to try. They sat together by the crib, hands intertwined, watching over their son as if time had stopped. That night, with balloons still floating in the next room and the quiet promise of tomorrow hanging in the air, Taehyung and YN found their closure. It wasn't just the end of a long journey, it was the start of forever. The Kim mansion, once the grand symbol of power and prestige, felt unusually heavy that evening. The chandeliers glowed, the walls were silent, but inside the living room, the atmosphere was different, thick with emotions no one dared to name. Mrs. Kim sat on the sofa, her fingers tangled together, eyes red from crying. She had visited Taewon earlier and still felt the warmth of holding her grandson in her arms. But as soon as she stepped back into this house, the weight of reality pressed down on her again. Her son had built a world of love away from these walls, and she had not been there for him when he needed her the most. V stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. He clenched his fists, swallowing hard as guilt ate him alive. All his arrogance, the golden child pride he once carried, now meant nothing. He thought of Taehyung, the brother who had stood by him through everything, who endured the sharpest cuts of their parents' coldness without breaking, and shame clawed at his chest. I was supposed to protect him, V muttered, almost to himself. Instead, I became one more person who failed him. Jia and Mia exchanged worried glances, their usual arrogance nowhere to be found. They had tried to make amends in their own shallow ways, but in moments like these, they realized how hollow their efforts looked compared to Taehyung's quiet strength. Their pride felt small, meaningless. Across the room, Mr. Kim sat stiffly in his chair, his face unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. He had held his grandson for the first time that morning, had felt the tiny heartbeat, the warmth of life in his arms, and for the briefest second, his heart had softened. But his ego was a prison he couldn't break. He should have joined the family business, he said gruffly, as if clinging to the only defense he had left. Mrs. Kim finally snapped, her voice trembling with both love and fury. Enough, do you not see what we've done? He built an empire on his own. He has a family who loves him more than anything, and we, his own parents, were never there. Stop pretending this is about business. It's about us, about how we failed as parents. Her words cut through the silence, and for the first time, Mr. Kim had no response. He looked down, shame pressing heavily on his chest. He couldn't admit it aloud, but the truth was undeniable. His son had won, not just in business, but in life. And he himself had lost the chance to be part of it. The room stayed quiet for a long time, only the faint ticking of the clock filling the air. One by one, the Kims sank into their own thoughts, regret, guilt, and a longing for what could never be undone. Far away, in his own home, Taehyung was cradling his son with YN by his side, surrounded by love, laughter, and peace. The contrast was stark. In the grand Kim mansion, there was no laughter, no warmth, only the echoes of mistakes and the weight of remorse. And the life would go on, the truth would always remain. They had lost Taehyung long before they realized how much he truly mattered.